Hi, this is Catherine. This is Taking Tea with Catherine. This is Tower of London Tea by Harney and Sons, which is a mildly flavored black tea, I think, with fruit flavors. Just very pleasant. And the reason I chose it today, besides just liking it, is because I am talking about a reading goal for 2022. I don't know how many I'm going to do of my reading goals for 2022, but I'm just going to start today with one of them. And one of my non-reading goals, although I'm sure it will be somewhat book related if it works out, is to go back to London. Wouldn't that be nice? And Tower of London obviously is in that city, and I would just like to be able to see that place as well as so many other places without having to look at a screen. We shall see. I know a lot of people have worse problems than that, but it would be really, really, really nice if I could get to London. My friend is planning to go as well, and we would really, really love it. So instead of going on and on about that, I'm going to talk today about 19th century authors that I would like to read in 2022. Some of these are ones I've been reading a lot of recently, and some of which I would like to read more of, etc. I'm not going to cover any authors that have books I'd like to reread, because that is a whole other category. I don't know if I'm going to get to it in a video, but I'm only going to talk mainly about authors that I have some 1, 2, or more volumes of their novels. And maybe, it's not just novels. There might be some collections of essays or stories that sneak in here a little bit, but mainly novels that I'm not the kind of person who ever is going to make an exact, I need to read only the books that I own. But that would actually be very satisfying if I could read more of the books that I own. I will always check books out of the library, and I will probably end up buying more books throughout the year, but I want to keep it a little more to a minimum. So if I stick to this goal of reading more of these books that I own, it would be great. But I'm mainly going to talk about the authors. Sometimes I will mention a title of a book that I want to focus on, but mainly the author themselves, just because I have their books. So if someone's on a list, it doesn't mean I don't want to read them. It just means that I couldn't cover everybody, and maybe I don't have one of their books yet. Or maybe I have one of their books yet, and I just include them, Sorry. So anyway, yeah, so obviously Jane Austen's not here because I've read all her books, and I will reread, but so, I never forget Jane Austen. But I'm going to start with one, like I said, there's no order here, but it's just someone I'd like to read again, even though I always kind of badmouth him a little bit, and that is Thomas Hardy. I only say negative things about him because so many of his books can be really depressing and frustrating. But I have a copy of The Mayor of Casterbridge, and I do also have Jude the Obscure. I think I would rather read the former, but I have seen the adaptation of that, and I know that I enjoyed it. It's not 100% happy either, but I think I'd like the book. And I had someone recently tell me that they think I would like it, so let's hope. George Eliot. Most of the time I like her books. I have a couple of her books that I haven't read that I own. Something along the lines of Felix Holt, something radical, something, and Romola I also have. I think the latter this time is the one I want to focus on, but either one would be nice. I have read so many of her. I sound like but I have. I've read quite a few George Eliot's books as when I started reading, non-children's section classics on my own without being assigned in school. She was one of the first ones. She was there around the same time as when I started reading Jane Austen, and so I have made a lot of progress, and of course I'd like to reread some of those books, but I want to read some of these for the first time. And then Charlotte Bronte. I've read quite a few of the Bronte books, but I never read The Professor, and I think it's mainly because I've always heard sort of whenever I mention that title. It's like, yeah, okay. Even in the biography of the Brontes, it was like, yeah, I mean, she submitted that, but they were kind of like, do you have something else? And it wasn't, I think it wasn't until she died that they published The Professor, I think. And it was kind of like, well, this is all we got, So that doesn't give me that much enthusiasm, but it is the last of the Bronte novels that we know of, anyway, the completed ones that I haven't read. So that would just feel so wonderful to complete, you know? And that would be just nice. Okay, Elizabeth Gaskell. I've read a number of her books, but I have at least 1 or 2 books of hers. I think Mary Barton I'm pretty sure that it's time, you know. I read North and South in October, finally, for the first time, even though I knew mainly what was going to happen in it, but it was such a great read. And all I kept thinking as I was reading her was, why have I not read Gaskell in a while? You know, what has taken me so long? It's mainly just because I have so many books that I read that, you know, sometimes even my favorite writers will somehow slip through the cracks, you know? Speaking of which, Charles Dickens, you know, I had a bit of a hiatus between his books because I kept trying to start a Dickens novel and I somehow just couldn't finish them. And I thought, is it that I've fallen out of love with Dickens, or is there just something in my mental makeup that just had lost a little bit of patience for him for the time being? And then I read the A Tale of Two Cities, and realized, no, I still love Dickens. I just had to read the right one to get me back in the mood, and now I'm back in the mood. So I think I'm leaning toward Barnaby Rudge, especially because my sister read Barnaby Rudge not too long ago and was enthusiastic about it, and we usually have the same taste in especially 19th century novels, so I can hope. And of course, when I mention Dickens, somehow who follows? Anthony Trollope. I am currently reading an Anthony Trollope, but I would like to read more. I would like to read multiple books of Anthony Trollope in 2022, just like I did in 2021 and 2020. So here's hoping. I think he is fantastic, and he is one of the people that I have so many of his books that I don't even know which one to pick. So after I finish the one I'm currently reading, I might just randomly get whichever one I'm in the mood for and just go for it. I have a couple of ones that I especially want to focus on, but we'll see. And okay, so I have a number of books that I have of Robert Louis Stevenson, and now I purchased just these pretty $1 volumes that I got from Argosy when they were still having $1 volumes in the front of their store. And I'm kind of sad that they went up to $3, but I actually understand that's still a very good price. But in this case, I was able to get multiple books by the same writer because of that really, really good price. And most of what I have of his books are essays of some sort, nonfiction. But I think I have Treasure Island, and I've heard mostly good things about it. I don't think it's the most up my alley kind of book, but I did recently finish a book by Jules Verne that I thought wouldn't be my thing, and I ended up liking it. I know they're not the exact same writer, but I somehow associate them in my head. So here's hoping. But I cannot believe I've read nothing of his. Nothing that I can think of. I also have at least one book by, now we're jumping back in time because I like to do that. I like to just make everybody a little bit dizzy. Maria Edgeworth. So she wrote more along the time of the early 19th century. So if during Jane Austen July I have to, well, have to, but usually there's at least one prompt to read a contemporary of Jane Austen's, and I didn't do too well with that this year, so maybe Maria Edgeworth will make things a little bit better. Yeah, there's a little bit of traffic, you guys. So my thinking, you know, I do have a little bit of a difficulty, besides Jane Austen, you know, with reading early 19th century writers. I don't know what it is that I lose patience with, but it doesn't mean I don't like any of those writers. It's just, I don't know, it's not as easy for me, maybe, I guess, to just get into it. So we shall see. I mean, there's also, no, we're not going to go into all the other writers that I could think of that time period. If it happens, it happens. But I'm going to move, just again, geographically, to Russia. And of course, I have is it going to be Dostoevsky, or is it going to be Tolstoy that I'm going to read more of? This year, I read one Dostoevsky Crime and Punishment and really liked it. And I had a Constance, is it Constance Garner or Gardner? Either way, I have a translation by her. She was more Victorian era, I think. So the language is a bit 19th century. That does not bother me. So I also have a copy of The Idiot, I'm pretty sure translated by her. So I'm obviously not going to be able to read it in the original Russian. So maybe I'll just read that one. It's a little bit of a crumbly book that I bought many years ago, but I really want to read it. So hopefully. And if I read Tolstoy, it'll probably be War and Peace, just because it's been looking at me accusingly. As has Dumas, Alexander Dumas. I have an unfinished copy of The Count of Monte Cristo, which I enjoyed, and then suddenly just put the brakes on, and then never came back to it. So it'd be great to get back to him. I have other books by him too. Who knows? I have a copy of Walden by Henry David Thoreau, which I read a bit of a number of years ago and then just abandoned it. Somehow I feel like I want to get back to him, and we'll see if I do. But that's not my biggest goal. I just thought I'd mention it. I have a number of books by, the Virago modern classics, and some of them are Victorian or 19th century. I'd like to read more of those books. And I have one by Charlotte Young, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and this year I heard her mentioned a couple of times during Victober, so I'm thinking maybe it's my time to read her as well. I have one copy of a book by Benjamin Disraeli, who was a writer, and he was also Prime Minister for a while during Queen Victoria's reign, a little bit later, I think, in her reign. And he was just, I think he might have been one of the prime ministers involved in getting the whole empire thing together to call Victoria Empress, whatever. But that isn't really what I'm thinking of. I have a book, and I don't remember, I think it's called Coningsby or Coningsby. Anyway, that's just been sitting up there for a while because I read another book of his and I quite liked it. So I thought maybe it's time to try him again. And yeah. And then last, this is one, I think I have at least one book of his, and I just don't know where it is. But if I find it, then maybe I should read him. Because I do think I should read more Nathaniel Hawthorne. Right? And he's 19th century, right? I don't think he's 20th century. I'm pretty sure. But either way, I'd like to read a little bit of him. I know I read a couple of books when he's another one I was reading when I was getting into reading classics. I think I read The Scarlet Letter and The House of the Seven Gables. I think those are both him, right? So, and I know I like them, so it would be really nice to get to him. He and Thoreau and Emerson, I think, were they all the ones who knew each other? I think, ish. So I'd like to kind of read at least some of their works, maybe around the same time. Might be a little project. Anyway, these do go along with one of my projects that I have mentioned before, and there is no deadline to this project whatsoever. It's more along the line of just a little Catherine thing, and I call it Poets and Pre-Raphaelites. It kind of encompasses a couple of my reading goals. One is to read more poetry, which I know I did not include here, but when I say I want to read poetry, I know I don't usually sit and read a whole volume of it. I just read a poem at a time here and there from somebody. So that's not really part of this deal. But I said Pre-Raphaelites because that's maybe works that inspired the Pre-Raphaelites, but that doesn't really count too much here because a lot of that was earlier works. But some things that had some relationship with the some of the novelists who knew them, some of the novelists who were inspired by them, some of the novelists that had illustrations like Anthony Trollope by at least one of the Pre-Raphaelites. So this sort of works in there a little bit, but so it helps to have these kind of goals. So that's all, at least for now. There might be more 19th century novelists that I haven't even thought of right now that are probably amazing. They're probably gathering dust on these shelves, but I thought, gotta stop here. And if I have any other ones in mind, you'll see them later on, perhaps in the TBR. Let me know if you guys have any of similar reading goals, if any of these writers are people that you say, ooh, yeah, I want to read that too. because you never know. Maybe we'll all end up reading it together or not. But yeah, I am looking forward to 2022. I'm not, trying not to get too excited about it because, last couple of years have been mostly disappointments. But still, my reading years haven't been that bad. Actually, they've been quite enjoyable. So maybe that'll be the highlight. Who knows? But for now, something in my nose. It's always pleasant on a video, isn't it? For now, this is Catherine taking tea with Catherine. Have a lovely tea and book-filled day.